cow this afternoon. She doesn't even care. She's feeding her cats. She doesn't know that we're going to wrestle Stevens Point tonight. She doesn't care. The lady right across the street with the cats. You look down behind the wall, everybody's nodding. I didn't even know that I hated Stevens Point until Greg started giving those rants. I didn't even know. The worst part about these rants, especially me as a new assistant coach, was at the end of every single one of them, especially the pre-match ones. He would look over at me and say, "Tim, you got anything to add?" What could I possibly add after that? Oh man, he was so humble. Maybe the most humble person I've ever been around. He didn't want the spotlight. He did not want to celebrate. He didn't even like to talk about a win after a win. He just didn't go there. It was almost like it was expected. So you didn't need to talk about it. I will say another one of my favorite moments though, and this is still unbelievable, was at UW La Crosse, a Division III school. We had a dual meet against the Big Ten Wisconsin Badgers. And on that night, UW La Crosse, little Division III school, no scholarships, meets the Big Ten UW Badgers in a dual meet. And I remember Greg saying, "Hey, why don't you come over to my house tonight?" He didn't talk about it, and it wasn't a big celebration, it wasn't a big rah-rah. But I remember going to his house, and Keely made tater tots. And Greg and I talked about wrestling till probably 2 in the morning. That was one of my favorite times. Consistency, hard work, being intentional in what you did. The workouts, the rants. He made guys confident in themselves without being arrogant. The trips to the Whittick pool, carrying the bikes across in the snow. The workouts, the sprints upstairs in the top of the gymnastics room in the Whittick Hall. The long practices. Most of them, I think Dave might have mentioned this, most of them live wrestling. It was magical. It was magical. I wanted to be a dad and a family man like Greg. And I still do. We all were lucky enough to have Moran and Connor at practice every day. They were part of our team. And it went something like this usually. They would come in, they would immediately ask for a snack. Greg would scrounge around for some sort of quarters and change and send them to the vending machine. And 10 minutes later, there would be M&Ms and Skittles all over the wrestling mat. That was their pre-dinner snack. Greg would do anything he could for his wife and kids. And it was evident. Connor was feisty. One day I came into practice, and I think on the way in I might have tried to give him a high five, and he wanted nothing to do with it. And as I walked by, he blindsided me. And he started to punch me and kick me. And he was little, but I needed to grab him so that it would stop. So I grabbed his arms, and I hear, "Tim, knock it off!" As Greg's watching the whole thing. We had a very big duel with Wartburg College the weekend the twins were born. I knew Greg was not going to go to the duel. I knew he was not. There wasn't even a question. His wife, his kids, his family. I remember him calling me and saying, "Hey, can you take the team down to Wartburg College and wrestle them in a duel?" The group that we had at La Crosse at that time was a pretty fun group. They worked really hard. They were into the things that they were into. And a lot of us wanted Greg to be a part of it all the time. Every time you asked Greg to do something, his response was the same all the time. I need to ask Keely. Let me check with Keely. I'll see what Keely says. And that was something about Greg that he just knew. He was never disrespectful to his wife, and it left an impression on all of us, maybe one of the biggest impressions. After the twins, I remember things got a little bit harder. You could tell on Greg's face that he hadn't gotten much sleep. I remember specifically one morning before HPR 105, he had the ESS sweatshirt on, and he was going to teach class, and I think I was teaching something in the field house there. I looked and I thought he had cottage cheese on his shoulder. I told him about it, and he just changed into another ESS sweatshirt that he had. I knew when I had my first child that I wanted Greg to be Bry's godfather. I think he taught us more about that, about being a father, about being a family man, than any wrestling technique or anything that had to do with wrestling at all. I wanted to be a friend like Greg, and I still do. I never went to his house in the summertime, or any time really, where there wasn't somebody else's kid that was in his living room or out in his front yard. Sometimes it was 2 or 3 or 4 kids from the neighborhood, and his kids weren't even there. I think Dave mentioned that he had people sleeping in his basement, maybe in his car, in his van. He would do anything for anybody. I remember specifically, he asked me to help him with a biking class that he had. And he said, I just need you to ride with the group up front because I know that there'll be some people that'll struggle a little bit. When we got to the class, I could see right away that there was people they were going for a 15-mile bike ride. I could tell that there was people that should not have been in the biking class. And Greg was going to ride and motivate those students the whole time while the rest of the people was finishing up their ride an hour ahead. I wanted to be a faithful Christian man like Greg, and I still do. I don't know how we made it through the Joe LaRosa time period at UW La Crosse, but I know that God had his hands all over us. The last time I talked to Greg, he said this, he said, Tim, I'm going to be your best friend when things are hard and you need me. But I'm not much of a friend when you're doing well. It's something that I'm working on. And I thought about that, and a couple days later I got a phone call and some messages from Eric Reed and Bergie. And I talked to Connor, and I found out that the worst thing had happened. The worst news. And what was crazy about it is that Greg hadn't even passed yet, and Connor had mentioned that his body was so strong that he might not pass for a while if it wasn't for the life-saving equipment that he was hooked to. And I know there's a lot of people in this room probably felt the same way, that if you leave that on, Superman is going to sit up in bed and he'll come back to us. At our Easter church service, our sermon was on the resurrection. And the pastor said a quote from Frederick Buechner. And and he said, "What does the resurrection mean?" And this was Frederick Buechner's quote. "Resurrection means that the worst thing is never the last thing." So I know we can celebrate Greg Lonning, knowing his life is not the end, and that we are all